Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second session of the day. We are excited with our great lineup of sessions today and also excited about our closing keynote tomorrow. So thank you to everyone who has been joining us over the week, but also to a bunch of new folks who are jumping on to listen to our session. So welcome to everyone for sure. So my name is Michael Lang, and I use the pronouns he, him, and I am the executive director of the Wyoming Arts Council. If you would like or need captions, you can use the transcription feature. To turn on subtitles, click on the CC Live Transcript button on the bottom of your screen between the record and reactions icons. Additionally, in an effort to be inclusive to those who may not be able to join us visually, we are asking those speaking today to introduce their physical appearance. So for me, I am a white male who is in my 40s. I am wearing a black collared shirt with the Wyoming Arts Council logo in the left shoulder and have short white and gray hair. I am in my home office here in Laramie, where I sit in a high back brown chair and a tan colored wall behind me. A few housekeeping notes before we kick off our session is that we want everyone to feel comfortable and involved as much as they can in the sessions happening today. If you need to get up or take a break, get a drink, do whatever you need to so that you can be as engaged with the call as possible. I do ask folks to feel free to use the chat feature in Zoom for any questions or comments that you may have during this session. We will also be doing a question and answer at the end, and we ask you to stay muted until that point. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next session speaker, Ara Newlin. A fourth Wyomingite and fourth generation Japanese American, Ara Newlin is an educator and public speaker whose heritage involves intertwined stories of imprisonment at Heart Mountain, Tule Lake, and Manzanar, racially segregated military service, and hardships suffered by Wyoming railroaders who were fired because of their Japanese ancestry. Ara serves as board secretary for the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation and is a board member of the National Consortium of Racial and Ethnic Fairness in the Courts. Ara earned a Bachelor of Arts in Ethnomusicology from the University of Wyoming and a Master's of Arts in Medical Anthropology from Case Western Reserve University, where she specialized in global health and infectious disease control. She is now focusing on the anthropology of law and is a PhD candidate at Case Western Reserve University. We're really excited to have Ara with us today, and Ara, I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mike, and hello, everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And hopefully you could see my screen in full now. Ooh, it looks like I have a weird green line down the middle. Let me know if that looks weird to you. I'll try and reshare it. For now, I'll keep going as is. Hold on.
There you go, Ara. That looks right.
Is that better? Okay, I got the black box out of the way.
Yes, you did. Good job.
Okay, so yes, thank you everybody for joining in. I know we would all rather be in person, but we also get the convenience and accessibility of being virtual. So we're thankful for that. As Mike said, my name is Ara Newlin. I use she, her pronouns. I am a mixed race woman of Japanese and Irish heritage. I'm wearing a black shirt. I have short brown hair, although I was really blonde when I was a kid, so it still like makes me feel weird to say that I have brown hair, but I do in fact have brown hair, and I'm sitting in a lovely log room. So I'm going to start with an image here. And this is a painting called Portrait of My Grandmother by Archibald Motley, painted in 1922. And it is a portrait of an older Black woman in like simple clothing, and she's just sitting there staring ahead, and it's a painting. And I saw this portrait at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., one of my favorite places to visit in D.C. And I was just walking through the galleries and I saw this portrait, and it like, I was transfixed. And I went and stood in front of her, and I just was standing there for probably 10 minutes just staring at her, and she's so beautiful. And I think what struck me so much about this photo that might be striking you as well right now is that it's not what we expect to see in a National Gallery of Art, right? The art world, at least in our country, has for a long time been very Eurocentric. We're also a very youth-centric society, and we're drawn to glamour. And this is a portrait of a woman who is not white and not young and not flashy. And it is spectacular. And I was so moved by this portrait that it made me want to know who she was. And that's where I start this. I'm going to come back later and let you know who this is. But that's sort of my starting point for today's presentation, which is about this project that I developed for my students, undergraduate students, in a course on racial and ethnic relations. I started teaching this course in 2018, and the challenge for me was to give my students really meaningful learning experience that actually hopefully enacted change within them, not just like learning about historical details, but I wanted to advance meaningful change on race relations to college students in Wyoming. The demographics here are that, like, overwhelmingly, these students are really, really nice students. They're eager to learn. But because of the demographic limitations in Wyoming, and on this campus, it was a predominantly white student body in a predominantly white town and state, a lot of the students came to the class like, I really want to learn about race, and I just haven't had many opportunities in my life to be as informed as I want to be. Or there were students of color who were like, oh, I finally get to be in a space with other, students of color, and it feels a little bit more friendly to me than my other classes. So that's the context here. And as a teacher, wanting to instill in them what I call visceral learning, learning that actually, you feel in your body and that sort of changes you at a deep level. I developed this assignment that I called APOC Profiles. It's a simple project that had really powerful results. And what I love about it as a social scientist is that it's inspired by several evidence-based interventions for race. So the task that the students had to do was they had to interview or research an awesome person of color, my term, APOC, awesome person of color, and then present that person's profile to the class in the first person. Really simple, really small, also possibly terrifying, depending on how comfortable students are with race, and really beautiful in its results. So in this session, I'm going to give you a tiny introduction to what we call the mind sciences, the neuroscience of race and how we perceive racial difference. I'm going to present a summary of the evidence that we have of what works to fix the some of the more subtle ways that we react to racial difference. I will share several examples of APOC profiles that my students created and that I created. And then at the end, I will share with you some of the brainstorming that I had and hopefully invite ideas from you on ways that I could rescale this project that was, it was really just designed as a little class project. But as I went further along, it really moved me so much that I like to envision it as something that could be scaled up. And in this context with an arts audience, I have dreams of turning this into a community arts endeavor that could engage local artists while amplifying local voices of color. So to start with just some of the fundamentals, when we think of race relations in our society and how tense and problematic our race issues are, we usually think, we as, society members, we often think of what's called explicit bias, like full-on racism, which looks like this, right? This is from Charlottesville. These young white men were, self-avowed white supremacists, and they, are total racists. That's what explicit bias looks like. This is also what explicit bias looks like. January 6th, this guy wearing a Camp Auschwitz sweater, not very subtle at all imagery of nooses and Jim Crow lynch mobs. These are people who, actually are racist. But actually, we have learned that the more difficult problem to solve with race, and the more prevalent problem, is not necessarily the rabid racists. They get the most attention and they're maybe the scariest. But the reason why race issues in our society have not been fixed, even though we've been supposedly working on them for hundreds of years, is that there's something that's in each one of us, that all of us are conditioned to see racial difference in particular ways, and usually negative ways. And those ways that we are conditioned come out of us when we are least expecting it, sometimes without us even realizing that we're doing it. And this is what makes solving race issues so difficult in our society. Here's some buzzwords for you, some jargon terms that you may have heard. You've probably heard of implicit bias, also racial anxiety, and stereotype threat. Now, I am not very skilled at training people on what these are. This is what we call the mind sciences. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview and then provide some resources so that you can educate yourself, because I'm just not very good at explaining it. I understand it, but I'm not skilled enough to really explain what these are. So implicit bias is the often unconscious ways that we perceive difference and associate that with, good or bad things. It usually manifests in the sense of somebody who consciously thinks racism is abhorrent, but nevertheless, when things get a little bit sketchy and stressful, our first reaction is often to react to racial difference in ways that communicate that we are, in fact, harboring some kind of negative perception of the other. So this can look like just, crossing the street when you see a person of color walking toward you, or clutching your bag a little bit tighter, or, wondering if, somebody is a threat, or is maybe not working hard enough, or something like that. Implicit bias. Racial anxiety is something a little bit different, which is a lot of us just feel super awkward when we talk about race, partly because in our society, we have not been encouraged to talk about race openly. So we're not very good at fluently speaking about race, and that can cause racial anxiety, which tends to also look like racism ultimately in our actions as we fumble over our words. And then stereotype threat is another one. Again, these all kind of overlap with each other, but stereotype threat is something when, for instance, I am so afraid of being perceived as racist that I then stumble over myself and act in racist ways. I just did a terrible job of explaining what those are, but here are some really good sources for you that I will provide to you. I'll be providing my slides after this, but also I'm going to pause for a second. If you want to screenshot your computer or whip out your phone and take a picture of this, if you just Google what I have here, these are the resources that I use for my students. After looking at a lot of resources, these ones I find resonate really well with new learners, and they're communicated in lay language and really, really engaging. So I recommend those. So that's the background, the starting point. And I'm going to walk you through, the great thing is that these ways that we react are in all of us, but there are ways to fix them, or at least to minimize the damage that that can come about because of them. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what some of the research has said, and we have decades of research on this now. So these slides come from this source by Rachel Godsill and colleagues that, again, you can look up after this presentation, but I've taken it from them. So one of the best ways and most effective ways that we can reduce the effects of our implicit bias is just to slow down. Like, if you're in a stressful situation and feeling you might be reacting in a way that is race-based rather than on something else, just slow down. Take a deep breath before speaking or acting or reacting. It's usually the reacting that is problematic, but the more you can train yourself to be mindful, take a deep breath before opening your mouth or doing anything. Also, another intervention that has shown to work is counter-stereotypic imaging. So as Godsill and colleagues say, you can kind of retrain your brain by imagining counter-stereotypic others in detail. So the stereotype that we get of, say, young Black men through the media, for instance, is usually either that they're like superstars as musicians or athletes, or they're criminals, and we don't get a lot of imagery in between that. So the intervention is to imagine young Black men who are not fitting those stereotypes. And in the TED Talk by Verna Myers that I highly recommend, she says that instead of striving for color blindness, what we should actually be doing is we should be staring at awesome Black folks all the time and seeing them for their full beauty and full individuality. So that's the next step, individuation, to seek specifics on a person and what makes that person unique, evaluating them based on personal attributes instead of group generalizations. The more we can individuate and see people for who they are as individuals, the more we can work against our unconscious bias. Another one is perspective taking, and this one seems like a stupid little thing. I guess a lot of these on their own seem like stupid little things, but they can be really powerful as it turns out. So even just taking the first person perspective of a member of a stereotype group helps us feel psychologically closer to not just that person, but the group as a whole. And it also protects us from automatic stereotyping if we can try and consciously put ourselves in somebody else's shoes by perspective taking. So coming back to this spectacular woman, this is again the portrait of my grandmother from the National Gallery of Art. I put together a profile of her, keeping these interventions in mind, and I'm going to read it to you. I put this together for my students. I researched her and then I put her story into the first person, and I'm going to read it. So the way that this works in my class is that I don't want you to look at me. You can listen to my voice, but while I speak her story, I want you to stare at her. Look at the contours of her face. Look at her hands. Look at every little detail of her as I speak. And so we're individuating. We are visioning a counter-stereotypic other, and it's in the first person. So here we go. My name is Emily Sims Motley. I was born in 1842 as a slave in Kentucky. I was a house slave, and I considered myself an exception being in that family. I loved my master and mistress, and they gave me a portrait of my mistress when I was freed at the end of the Civil War. I have taken care of that portrait like a very valuable diamond. I married a Native American man, and we raised our children in Louisiana. In the early 1900s, my family and I moved to Chicago. We were part of what is now called the Great Migration of African Americans fleeing the South in search of a better life. My grandson, Archibald J. Motley Jr., is an artist from the era known as the Harlem Renaissance. He's considered one of the great American portraitists and a major contributor to the body of Black art. My bedroom was next to his art studio in my son's house. These two portraits are from 1922 and 1924. One is titled Mending Socks, and the other is titled Portrait of My Grandmother. I'm a devout Catholic, and I read the Bible daily. I also enjoy doing needlework. And I got those sources from the Whitney Museum, but I converted them into this little bite-sized profile. So now you know who she is. So that was the first profile I did, which helps with implicit bias, but there are other, problems that we have, including racial anxiety and stereotype threat. So some of the interventions for racial anxiety specifically, if you're just super awkward when it comes to talking about race, one of the best things you can do is intergroup contact, seeking opportunities to engage at a meaningful level with people outside of your identity group. This helps you feel a connection to the other. And again, from Verna Meyer's fabulous TED Talk, she gives us this advice that in order to get comfortable, we have to get uncomfortable first. We have to be willing to fall on our faces, get out of our comfort zones in order to become better at this. So intergroup contact is so important. And it can be indirect, or what we call extended contact. So what I hear from my students all the time in this very white state of ours, they're like, but I don't know any Black people. How am I supposed to interview someone or find somebody? I don't know any people of color. And in this case, I said, I don't know any Muslim people. Muslim, of course, refers to a faith, but has been racialized over time, particularly post 9/11, to be like Muslim looking. And so that's why I'm using that example here as well. But the research shows that just knowing that other people in your own group have close positive relations with, for example, Muslim people, that can help your own attitudes shift towards being positive. So if you can't have direct contact, it is helpful even just to have indirect contact. So I'm going to share another, this is the second profile I ever did after Emily Sims Motley, who obviously I couldn't interview because she's not alive anymore. But this one, I, again, was seeking an example for my students. And I reached out to my cousin, Kristen Newlin, who I saw is out there in the audience today. Hi, Kristen. And she's married to this fabulous man named Emery. And I asked her if I could profile him for my students, and she said, sure. And actually I cheated a little bit because she did the interview with him and not me, but they were living in Turkey. And so that's my poor excuse, but it's still fabulous. So here we go. My name is Emery Vatansever. For several years, I was an assistant coach for Yakin Doğu Üniversitesi, a professional women's basketball team in Istanbul, Turkey. We were the EuroLeague champion, 3-time Turkish League champion, and 2-time Euro Cup champion. I've also spent the past several seasons working with American WNBA teams, which is the Women's National Basketball Association, including the Seattle Storm and the Chicago Sky. I'm currently an assistant coach for the Chicago Sky, and we just won our first national championship like 2 weeks ago or something. Go Chicago. Oops, that was my voice, not his, obviously. But anyway, I have always been so proud to be Turkish. There's a common saying here in Turkey that translates to how great it is to say that I'm a Turk. Our entire country shares this sentiment, and we're a passionate people. It wasn't until I started regularly coming to America that I've been hesitant about people knowing that I'm Turkish, which I know translates to them seeing me only as Muslim. Because of what I hear on the news regarding how Americans feel about Muslim majority countries, I'm most nervous going through customs at the airport. I've thought about shaving my beard, which I have because I like it, not for any religious reason, but I've thought about shaving it to make myself look less Muslim. Thankfully, once I pass customs, the people I'm surrounded by in America have put my fears to rest. Although I know it isn't everyone's experience, my experience has always been pleasant with the people I interact with. Even across cultures, I feel I have more in common with other people than differences. Especially in the basketball world and on a team, we have one goal that unites us, and that's all that matters. Our team is filled with different cultures, but we all come together for something bigger, and that's when championships happen. So a little PS from me. Since this interview, Emre became a father to twins in 2018 and has a new baby as of 2021. Emery and his wife, Kristen, my cousin, were recently featured on a Wyoming Chronicle episode through Wyoming PBS. So if you want to learn about how fabulous they are, you can check that out. And I give you this as an example, not just, again, of a APOC profile, but it speaks to this topic of indirect contact. So the research says that even if you don't ever get to know Emery himself, if we can see my cousin Kristen, who is, you know, of Irish heritage, married to a Turkish man, that does something to our brains to think like, oh, look, somebody who looks like me can, you know, be in love with someone who looks like him. And that does help our brains to be rewired in the ways that we want them to be. So thank you, Kristen and Emery, for letting me show you off. All right, so for those of you who are thinking like, oh, but I'm just so awkward and I don't have a cousin who's married to a Turkish guy, so I feel like I'm gonna really flub this up if I try it. There are also some research-based interventions that help with stereotype threat, like when we're really afraid of coming off as being racist. One of them is a behavioral script. So you start with a structured interaction, and the example that Rachel Godsoe gives on this is like when you go to a restaurant, the waiters and waitresses have kind of a behavioral script that they approach you with. So regardless of who you are, they know that they can come to your table and be like, hi, how are you? Welcome to our restaurant. Here's what our specials are for today. And that helps break the ice so that then you can move on to more comfortable interactions. You start with a behavioral script. Also, it's important to have a growth mindset, thinking I'm here to learn and I can learn this. I might suck at it now, but I can learn this, instead of thinking of yourself as somebody who just doesn't have the ability to interact cross-culturally, cross-racially. And then value affirmation, focusing on shared identities and values instead of on stereotype categories. And I think one of the best examples of this is there's an amazing song by Bill Withers called Grandma's Hands that I actually use in my class. If we had more time, I would play it for you. But he describes his beloved grandmother in detail in this song. That's also like a really cool song. And it became a big hit of his. And at the beginning of one of his concerts, it was the Live at Carnegie Hall concert, he starts telling this story and he says, you know, I've been going, you know, I play concerts all over the world, and people approach me from all different races, all different nationalities, and they walk up to me and they say, you know what? I dug my grandma too. And that's an example of value affirmation. Instead of focusing on the category and me thinking like, oh, you're a Black man, so maybe you are a certain way that's different from a certain way that I am. We both dug our grandmother, right? And that's a point of contact that we can share. That's value affirmation. So with all of those together, I piled them all into this teeny little assignment that, again, I called it APOC Profiles assignment. Students are required to present a 5-minute profile of an awesome person of color in their life. The profile will be individuated. It will be counter-stereotypical. It will be presented in the first person, which is an example of perspective taking. It involves intergroup contact for the presenter. Ideally, this works best if it is a cross-racial interaction, but I also was fine with my students interviewing people. Like if they wanted to interview a family member, they totally could. Like we have slim pickings here in Wyoming. So I said, any person of color you can find, it's fine. It works best if it's cross-racial, but it's fine if it's not. If it is, though, that results in intergroup contact for the person who's doing the profile, so it helps them. And for those of us who see the profile, we get indirect contact for the rest of this. And so over the course of a semester with my students, we would see one APOC Profile twice a week. And so we're just inundated with all these beautiful stories, and it's so, so cool. And I give them an interview guide, and these are the questions that I wanted my students to ask. What's your name? What roles do you view yourself as filling? How do you self-identify? How has your race or ethnicity shaped your life experience in both positive and negative ways? And what do you want people to know about you? So pretty friendly, open-ended interview. And here's another one that I'm going to share with you. So I did the first two, but what really just blew me over consistently over the like 3 or 4 years that I taught this class was that the profiles that my students created were spectacular. And here's one of them. And this is an example that's not cross-racial for the interviewer. My student, Michaela Mendez, interviewed her sister, Isabel Mendez. So here we go. Again, don't look at me. I want you to look at Isabel's face in detail. The beauty of her smile, look at, you know, the texture of her hair, take in the individual details of Isabel. All right, my name is Isabel Mendez. I consider myself Mexican American. I work as a registered nurse in North Central Wyoming. I've gone through the LPN program as well as the RN program at Northwest College. I'm currently a full-time student at the University of Wyoming, finishing my bachelor's degree in nursing. To get to know me a little better, I love reading books. I am a big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. My favorite is Winter Soldier. I like being outside when the weather is nice, and I love spending time with my pets and my family. I'm hardworking, and I love being a nurse. I get to help others who need help, and it's a great feeling. Throughout my life, I've experienced racism. I've faced it out in public and also while working as a nurse. At the hospital I work at, there are mainly those who are considered white because of their skin tone. During one shift, I went into a patient's room and she asked me if I was the CNA for the night. I told her, no, I'm the nurse tonight. And she was completely in shock. She didn't believe me and she told me I couldn't really be a nurse. It just upsets me at times when people don't believe that I'm a nurse and assume other things about me. I've also experienced racial slurs during shifts in the ER. I try not to let these things bother me, but I just can't help it at times. With the bad, there's always good. I've also faced many positives throughout my life. I've been praised for becoming a nurse. Plus, when I have friends who come over that are white, they're surprised about our party gatherings, at least the gatherings we had before COVID. They were surprised about how much food was made and how many people were there and all the talking that goes on. They got to know more about what our culture was about, which is amazing. In a perfect world, I don't wish for anyone to go through racism or discrimination. I'm proud to be a Mexican American, and I hope others aren't afraid of what others think of them. Isabel Mendez, awesome person of color. So again, that's easier if your sister is an awesome person of color, or if your cousin's husband is. But what if you are, you know, again, someone in Wyoming who really doesn't have much experience, and you don't have, you know, people who you're that close with, so you feel super awkward. I also provided my students with a behavioral script that communicates a growth mindset and affirms shared values. And I tell my students that if you suffer from a lot of racial anxiety, just put it out there up front, and then it becomes less awkward. So you can tell your friend who you're interviewing, like, look, I'm probably going to stick my foot in my mouth here. And so if I do, don't take it personally. I'm learning this, and thank you for your patience with me. And then it makes it all okay. So the behavioral script that I give to my students, and I'm also like gifting this to you. I hope that you in the audience are thinking about like, oh, well, what would I do? Like, how would I feel if I were doing one of these profiles? Here's a script that makes it really so much less scary. Something like this. I'm taking a course on race, and we have an assignment to do an informal profile of an awesome person of color. I've never had the chance to talk to you about race before, and since I think of you as an awesome person who's also a person of color, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share some of your experiences with me. In this class that I'm taking, we've been talking about how the media bombards us with negative or overly simplified stereotypes about minorities. The brain science shows that one way to move beyond those stereotypes is to repeatedly connect with real people who don't fit that stereotype. So if you're okay with me presenting your profile, I'd like to take 5 minutes in class to show your picture and share your name and whatever fun facts you want me to include and your answers to a few questions that I have. So what do you think? You up for it? And that you can see, if I give you this crutch, it makes it all of a sudden so much less scary to think of like having a conversation about race with a person of color who you know, but maybe don't know that well, and you're afraid of insulting someone. So I'm going to pause for a second here and ask you guys, I'm not going to ask you to type anything in the chat, although go for it. Actually, if you want to type this in chat, that would be awesome. But you can also just think for yourself and jot it down. I want you to imagine yourself having to do this assignment. Of course, if it's students in my class, they have to do it because they get a grade for it. But hopefully you might want to do it. So imagine, if you're just imagining yourself being the one doing a profile, what emotions does that provoke in you right now? Like, do you feel butterflies in your stomach right now? Is there this sense of like, oh no, I can't do that? Or is there excitement? Also, reflect on the awesome people of color in your life. Who might you go to? And it doesn't even have to be somebody that you know very well, but you might be like, oh yeah, I had this colleague who we really like each other, but we've just never had a conversation. This is a chance to have that conversation. Think about what would be difficult about doing this project for you, knowing your personality, and also what would be fun about it for you. So keep these in your head as I go through a couple more profiles, and maybe there'll be time at the end to share, if I time it okay. All right, I have a few more. I'm just going to go through them to give you a sense, again, more of the diversity. All of these people are from Wyoming. Like, we think we're so white, there's no diversity here, but there actually is. I invited Hazely to this presentation. I don't know if she's on, but she's fabulous. All right, my name is Hazely France. I'm a wife and a mother of 3. I'm a quality assurance professional in the pharmaceutical industry. My bachelor's degree is in zoology. I have 3 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. I prefer being called African American, although I'm not offended by the term Black American. My race has both negative and positive influences on me as I've grown up. I was raised in Detroit, and as a school-age child, we always watched the same video of Martin Luther King Jr. during Black History Month. I didn't understand why we always watched that same video. Black history is so much larger than that. Growing up, there was always such a heavy emphasis on our roots in slavery, and as a parent, it's challenging to give my children the facts while balancing that information with some of the more positive parts of our family history. I'm trying to follow my maternal grandmother's lead. She taught me to be proud of my heritage and not to be afraid of being the only one in the group that was different. I'm named after her, and I spent a lot of time with her as a child. And I'm going to skip forward because there's some awesome stuff here, but it's a little bit long. She goes on to say, I realized that during most of my school years, even through college, I suffered subconsciously from a feeling of inferiority because current thought at the time was that African Americans were less intelligent than whites. My grandmother encouraged me to not be afraid to push forward, even if I was the only African American in my class or 4-H club. She told me not to be afraid to share my ideas. One thing I've learned over the years is that I honestly don't care what other people think of me. A few years ago, another little girl wouldn't hold my daughter's hand, and several of the adults who saw it came and apologized to me. I really don't want anyone to get upset about how I or my daughter are treated because it really isn't worth it to me. People have said mean things to me because I'm plus sized too. But if someone doesn't like me, I don't care. They're entitled to their opinions. However, prejudice and discrimination in the workplace or affecting where I can live or eat is another matter. My skin color should have nothing to do with that. I think giving back what you can is critical, and it's part of our responsibility as individuals. I haven't really had much opportunity to give back yet at this stage of my life, but I volunteer at my children's elementary school when I can. And I recently volunteered as assistant den leader in the Boy Scouts. I enjoy volunteering, and I look forward to doing more in the future when my family work responsibilities are less consuming. I'm just going to inundate you. I have 2 more, and then I'll wrap it up. Hello, My name is Gabrielle Francisco Amato. I'm a musical theater student and a professional. I took my junior year off of college to tour with Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. I graduated 2 months from LIU Post in New York. I identify as mixed race. My mother is Italian, Irish, Swedish, and more. I was raised as an Italian. My father is Dominican. I grew up in a white community, so I felt more comfortable there than with my dad's family, as they all spoke Spanish. My father looks Black and identifies as Black. I grew up not feeling like part of any particular race, which caused an emptiness that couldn't be filled. I just didn't fit in with either race. Now I feel as though I'm more like a bridge between white and Black people, and recently have identified more with Blacks than with whites. I didn't get discriminated much for being mixed race. A couple of times people called me half-breed, but I learned that that's what made me unique. And it actually helped me decide to go into musical theater. I was discriminated against more for being gay. I know I'm marketable because of my unique look. I used to have auburn hair, and now I have more freckles and I have dark skin. It sets me apart. I want people to know that I'm learning to find my place. It has taken a while, but I'm happy to be who I am and to be unique. You will see me on Broadway. Yay, Gabrielle. Beautiful, beautiful, awesome people of color. And my last one here is Hunter Old Elk, who's actually here in the audience. Hi, Hunter, I can even see you. And I heard you speaking at the end of last one. So we have our very own awesome person of profile, awesome person of color with us today. Hunter graciously agreed to be interviewed by one of my students a few years back. So here she is. Hello. My name is Hunter Carolina Old Elk. Oh, one thing that I'll say here, since Hunter's here, I could totally just let her speak for herself, but actually the point of this is that it's really powerful for me to speak her words. I am not her, and it's important for me to be able to say I when imagining her. So part of the intervention is not actually to just have me hand it over to Hunter, theoretically. Hello, my name is Hunter Carolina Old Elk. The name given to me when I was 1 year old is Bia Basana, which means women in the front. Another way to explain it is one who takes action for the lead. They call me by my given name during our many sacred ceremonies. I'm currently the curatorial assistant at the Plains Indian Museum in Cody, Wyoming. I self-identify as first a human being, then a daughter, then a member of the Crow tribe, and finally a member of the Yakama Nation. I grew up on a reservation in Montana, so I always identified as a member of the Crow tribe. There were 2 clan systems in the tribe consisting of extended family. My mother's clan was responsible for my health, well-being, and spirituality, while my father's clan was responsible for bragging about me. Both clans were responsible for my cultural education. I'm very proud of my heritage. I went to college on scholarships in Maryland and basically wrote my own major. I had never been exposed to different cultures, so it was different for me when I moved away. I felt insignificant to the greater USA, and I struggled being away from what was comfortable to me. However, it's strengthened my identity, made me aware of others, and made me more self-aware. I did feel like I was in the minority. Growing up on the reservation, I didn't experience discrimination. However, now that I'm in the work world, people do make fun of my last name. I find that middle-aged white men use the term Indian with aggression. I want others to know that my experience is not the same as all other Indigenous people. I do not want to be stereotyped. I'm very proud of my people. If you're interested in finding out more about Native Americans, a good book to read is Playing Indian by Philip J. Deloria. Yay, Hunter. Thank you for sharing a bit of yourself with us. Okay. Sweet, I really nailed the timing here. I have about 5 minutes left before then hopefully having time for some questions. So that's what the project is. And I have, I taught this for like, I think 4 semesters. So I have like 40 or 50 of these, and you get this effect collectively when you scroll through them. It's just like, I anyway get so filled with joy. It's almost overwhelming. So I would love to rescale this. Some of my ideas have been to turn this into a website, to make web profiles. sort of off of the model of Lindsay Linton Buck's Women in Wyoming. Check it out if you haven't. And then also, this is not Wyoming connected, but there's a photographer named Jill Peterson, and she did profiles of trans women in different countries. So she has these third gender profiles from India and sworn virgin profiles from Albania. So these are things that I've thought of, like, oh, I could totally put these online with the write-ups, and that would be cool. But then, of course, I started, going even bigger, and I envisioned, for example, could you imagine a mural on like a downtown building in some Wyoming town with all of, painted portraits of these awesome people of color. I envision profiles being submitted by local community members. So, especially white folks in town could be like, oh, I want to have a conversation about race with my, Honduran friend. So they could submit the profiles. It would feature local awesome people of color. The mural or, portraits or whatever could be painted by local artists. I envision having QR codes on that mural that I'm envisioning in my head that would then link people to the profiles online so they could learn more and connect to links. And of course, I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I envision, like, wouldn't this have to be funded? Wouldn't this be a great way for somebody in the state to fund something that engages communities, amplifies people of color, and just makes everybody feel all warm and fuzzy about everything? That would be awesome. I have had some other ideas too about like podcasts or even radio and TV, but I think there's so much potential for this. My closing thoughts, why this particular like little assignment? Really importantly, it has shown to be fun and rewarding for both the person doing the profile and for the person of color themselves. I was worried at first, I was worried about offending people at first, like, oh, am I crossing a line here? Before rolling it out as an assignment, I introduced it to several of my, I think it was just my Black friends who I shared it with, but they were all super excited about it. So I felt a little bit okay about introducing it. And then as more and more profiles were done, I would hear back from the students and their friends of color, like, oh, that was super fun. Oh, I was really happy to share of myself and for people to see me for my race and such an important part of my identity. So it was a really positive experience. Collectively, they make a really beautiful anti-racist statement that's also very easily digestible. Like, these are not controversial. It's just like awesome people doing awesome things, and we get to know them. It's full of warm fuzzies. It's in these tense times. I think this is actually not a project that would get people up in arms so much. Also, very importantly, I think if it were rolled out publicly, it could help our local communities here in a state like Wyoming, or anywhere really, by increasing the sense of belonging for people of color, to have them celebrated and invited in and engaged. And also, it increases positive cross-racial interaction in our communities. Also, we think of ourselves as being in these really white communities, but honestly, it's not that it's all white. It's just that we're extremely segregated. So there are lots of, Mexican folks or Chinese folks or Native folks in all of our Wyoming towns. Our Black population is granted much, much smaller, but there are definitely people of color in our communities. We just don't talk to each other, right? So this gives us an excuse to talk to each other and celebrate all of the people in our communities. So this is my last slide. Oh, look at that. Mike just came on. I couldn't have timed that even better. I think we have a few minutes for questions, but here are some prompts for you if you want to jump in with this. If you did a profile, if you were, interviewing someone to do a profile, what do you think would be hard about it? What would be fun about it? Do you have questions about the project? Or is there anything about it that makes you be like, I'm not sure that's really so good, because this is, just my brainchild that I've been tweaking. but I'm always eager to hear concerns. If you have other ideas for rescaling it. If there are people in the audience like Hunter who were profiled by my students, or if some of my students are in the audience who created profiles, we'd love to hear your experiences. What was it like taking part? And that's it. I will unshare my screen.
Ara, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And we would definitely be open for any comments folks have. I see Hunter has unmuted. So Hunter, maybe if you could kick us off, that would be lovely.
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, thank you for highlighting me. That was very beautiful, and for you to give me the autonomy to say my proname it's beautiful to hear. That's who I see myself first. And what I loved about being a part of this process was the questions and the interaction was set up to see me as a human being first. And that was something that I thought was really beautiful, where I didn't feel like the questions were asking some niche part of this perception that people have of Indigenous communities and or people of color. And I thought that was set up really well. My other thought is, I think this would be a really cool activity to adapt it to all expressions, rather than just people of color, but like queer communities and trans communities and able communities and so on and so forth. And I could see how that would fit in other ways. And I'm really excited for you, Ara. I had no idea you had collected so much data, and I'm excited to see like where it goes from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Hunter. And yes, it should be for other identities too. It happened to be on race and ethnicity because that was the class that I was teaching. But as I'm going along, obviously this would be a perfect way to profile our, queer folks in the community. And honestly, it can be white folks too. It can be, a way that everybody can share of themselves instead of certain groups being profiled while others get neglected. So thank you.
All right, while we wait for some other questions, and as a reminder, there in the reactions, you can raise your hand maybe if you have a question. You can also just unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can drop questions over in the chat box. Either however you feel comfortable, we'd love to hear from you. Maybe while we're waiting, Ara, I'd kind of love your thoughts on, you talked a bit about racial anxiety, like folks being kind of concerned to talk about it because they're worried that they may say something wrong or they may offend someone, or or they just don't feel comfortable. And so, I see that a lot, and I also see this complication around kind of cancel culture where folks are just so concerned to say anything that may someone else may take negatively. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit more about that, and just kind of the idea of trying to give our community members grace as we, step in and talk about some complicated issues, for sure.
So there are two sides of our community members that I have in mind here. One would be the white community, the broader, more like public community, who might, oftentimes the emotion that white folks feel in conversation about race is awkwardness and anxiety or defensiveness. And that's not just the people who are racist get defensive. It's all of us, if we feel like we're under attack, it's a very natural thing to want to defend yourself and deny and things like that. But this, I think, is it was designed really for white students, rural white students. And because of the way that it's set up to invite people in and allow the person who's doing the interviewer, if it's a white person, it allows them room to mess up. Occasionally, you get permission to be awkward, and granting that permission somehow brings down a lot of the defenses. And then again, when you see the results and you see oh, this, Muslim person doesn't seem like a terrorist at all. it helps both. And so a concern that I had about the people being profiled, especially in a state where it's predominantly white, and Hunter spoke to this a little bit, that was my concern, was that I really didn't want my students like running up to people and being like, hey, you're Black, can I talk to you? Like, there are all sorts of ways that you can approach the topic and not be helpful about it, which is where the behavioral script helps. I encourage students to approach someone that they know, and most people knew somebody. It's harder to do in a pandemic. So I also gave them the option, like, if you really don't have someone in your life that you're close enough with that you could approach with this like behavioral script, if you just think you're going to make things worse, I don't want you to make things worse. I really don't want you to tokenize someone or make like the one Black person in town feel like they're the ones that everybody goes to for diversity programming. Like, that's something we need to always be aware of. If they don't have a connection like that, I gave them an option of researching someone like I did with Emily Sims Motley, and it was beautiful. But also, I think that what I've heard from the people who have been profiled is that they didn't feel tokenized or targeted for just like wanting to speak up for their whole race, because the approach is genuine. Like, you're already my friend, and I'm realizing that there's this part of you, which is your identity, that I've never connected with. And as your friend, I want to know you better as your whole person. So in the interest of developing a relationship, let's talk. And I think that that kind of approach just makes all the difference in the world, if that answered your question.
That's great. Thank you so much. We probably have time for one more question. If anyone might have a question. I see pretty much the whole town of Riverton is on the phone call. So it's, I mean, on the Zoom meeting, so.
I'm from Riverton, by the way. I grew up with Mike.
All right.
Oh, I see that Denise says, like, I love that song, Grandma's Hands, check it out. Oh, and again, I will share my slides and also the links of the resources that I mentioned. I'll share that with the Wyoming Arts Council after this. So however you guys communicate with audience members, you'll be able to listen to that song yourself and also read the articles and watch TED Talks and stuff like that.
That's wonderful. Well, I think that is a great place for us to wrap up. Ara, thank you as always for your presentation and your wonderful commitment to DEI work in Wyoming, which is not, as we've talked about, is not always easy, but is definitely work that's needed. And for those of you who this is the first time meeting Ara, we're excited. Ara will be helping us with some of our initiatives at the Wyoming Arts Council moving forward in our equity initiatives to help support folks across the state of Wyoming. So this is not the last I'm sure you will see of Ara, and we're excited to have her helping us out with our work at the Arts Council. And on that note, please hang around for our next session with Brandon Gellis. Brandon will get kicked off in just a few minutes. So feel free just to hang on the Zoom call, and we will be back with you in just a few minutes.